Hey there. It's Wednesday, November 12th, 2018, and it has been too long, my friends. Welcome back to the A-Side Live Chat Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. We have missed you guys. I hope everyone out there is having a wonderful week, and thank you so much for spending a little bit of it today here with us. My name is Jon al-shatti, and that man over there, you already know who he is. He is coming at you from the MMA Fighting Sweatbox in LA, Mr. Mark Raimondi. How are things, Mark?
It's been forever.
I know
it's been forever, Sean. Good to see your face again.
Likewise, I was missing your face very much, Mark.
Why are you lying to me on a Wednesday morning?
Oh, man, I was going through withdrawals last Wednesday. It was a thing.
I'm not buying any of that. Nothing.
Just trying to make you feel better. I'm just trying to make you feel better.
I feel great. I don't know what you're talking about. I feel fantastic. Just got back from Sacramento late last night. Was in Vegas on Monday. Been traveling this whole week, but I'm back here in Los Angeles, the MMA fighting sauna, and I'm ready to go. Let's do this. Let's make it happen.
Let's do this. And hey, I got my festive mug. I got some tea. It feels nice. So hey, we got a loaded show for you guys today. The Blessed Express rolls on. My camera's freaking out. All right, there we go. Blessed Express rolls on after a busy week in Toronto. Jon Jones, Alexander Gustafsson 2, that is officially on. And now we have a ridiculously jam-packed weekend here coming up. 2 Bellator events, 2 days, plus the end of the UFC on Fox Era, and a whole lot more. But as we always say about this time, this is your guys' show, so we will talk about anything at all that you want us to talk about. You can ask this question on the MMA Fighting page. That's below. And any question that gets 3 recs, those will turn green, and those will get priority. Or you can ask this question on Twitter using the hashtags TheASide and Chat Rappers. A replay of this podcast going up immediately following the show on YouTube, also iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, Stitcher. You know the good. You know how this goes. Wherever else you get your pods. And if it's not up there, tell Mark or I, and we'll get it up there. And with that, let's do this, Mark. We got too much to get into to waste time. Let's dive right into some questions, my friend.
Let's do it.
All right.
From Robin G.
Oh, you're switching it up. You're asking. All right, go for it.
I'm asking. From Robin G. from the MMAfighting.com comments, light heavyweight is not the worst division. For months and months, we have been led to believe by a lot of media outlets, including MMA Fighting, that light heavyweight is a shallow division with no fun new names. Can we stop this and call it like it is? The 2 best fighters ever are at this time champion and #1 contender in this division. There's a heck of a fight coming up with Jones Gustafsson, and a lot of new names are coming up. Thiago Santos and Smith have been making waves on our finishers. Reyes is very good and interesting to watch, and even Johnny Walker, shot, can be seen as a future dynamic contender. What if the middleweights that already mentioned light heavyweight, Romero, Weidman, Rockhold, also come up? Then light heavyweight is one of the strongest and interesting divisions. Does Robin G have a point, Sean? Is light heavyweight better than we have given it credit for?
I love the premise of the question. For months and months, we have been misleading people, leading them to believe this fact.
The mainstream media is telling lies about the light heavyweight division.
In a word, no, we're not wrong. I mean, it's not the worst division. I don't feel like many people call it the worst division. I think there are definitely others out there, women's featherweight, even flyweight, where it's maybe not as interesting as light heavyweight is, but light heavyweight is definitely one of the most top heavy, right? Because you got Jon Jones, even if you want to throw in Daniel Cormier, Gustafsson, and then you got a kind of hodgepodge of people below them, and a lot of them very old. That's why we get excited about a Thiago Santos, who just did tremendous things here over the weekend, or at Anthony Smith, or these guys who, at these periphery contenders at 185, who all of a sudden become top contenders at 205. I mean, that is the hallmark. That is really all the proof you need that this division may not be the deepest, because you just saw it over the weekend. Thiago Santos was a longtime contender at 185. He was always winning fights, but he could never really make it there. And now all of a sudden we're talking about him in this space where maybe he is something at 205, just as we did with Anthony Smith. So I disagree with the premise, but it is, I will say, between Alexander Rakic, who also moved to 3-0 in the UFC on Saturday, Anthony Smith, Thiago Santos, and Dominick Cruz, there is some interesting names coming up at 205. We may not be talking about it as such a shallow division for very long.
I think Robin G is onto something, although, like you said, Sean, maybe not quite yet, because there are still some names in that top 5, top 10 who have been lingering there for a very long time, who are names from the past. I don't want to mention any names, but Shogun Rua is still up there, although he's had a very nice win over Tyson Pedro a couple weeks ago. But I think that Robin G is correct about where the division is going. It may not be there yet, but I think that there is something to that. I think that if some of those names mentioned, like a Rockhold or Romero, go up to a 205, which I believe they should, I think they should go up there. That is a huge infusion of talent. And then there is a very interesting group of fighters who are still in their 20s who are coming up. And you mentioned Rakic, who had that big win over Devin Clark over the weekend. There's also Dominic Reyes, of course, who's 27 years old. There's Johnny Walker, 26 years old. Don't forget Mr. Nikita Krylov, who's only 26 years old. You know, he's kind of been in the UFC, out of the UFC, back in the UFC, but he's only 26. He still has a bright future ahead of him. There is Jim Crute or Crute, whatever. He got a big win recently too. He's only 22 years old. And my personal pick for a future possible title contender at that weight class, Ian Cutelaba, only 24 years old, and he is devastating when right. 24 years old at light heavyweight, I think he could have a big future ahead of him, and I think that division could have a big future, and we'll see what happens. UFC 232 is coming up in 2 weeks now. Can Jones kind of get back to the mountaintop and then preside over that division again and welcome some of these new contenders? It would be very interesting to see a Jon Jones, who was once one of these prospects, now 31 years old, welcoming some of this new blood. Like a Jon Jones Dominic Reyes fight could happen in 2019 if the division shakes out that way, which could be it could be a whole new world for 205 in the UFC. Once the premier division with guys like Chuck Liddell and Rampage Jackson, Randy Couture, Vanderlei Silva could possibly get back to that with this new group of 20-somethings.
Yeah, you know, I actually want to add two things to what you're saying, because you make very good points. One, I agree with you. There's like a healthy collection of like 20-somethings who are all kind of like maybe in that 15 to 20 to maybe 12 to 20 range, who really, like you said, within maybe a year or two, maybe even by this time next year, we're looking at this division differently than we are now, because you just got to give those guys time. Give them time to get better, to work their way up. But also, I feel like this might be one of the situations. I mentioned flyweight. Flyweight isn't actually that bad. I think that just when you have one champion that is so overwhelmingly dominant for a long period of time, that inevitably makes the rest of the division look weaker. And I think we've seen that at light heavyweight, where it was Jon Jones and then it's Daniel Cormier. It's just those two at this point. The rest of the division, we just know they're not going to stack up to those two. So inevitably, those matchups and those fighters just look weaker by comparison. So I don't know. I think there could be something there. But I want to ask you really briefly, just before we move on. Thiago Santos moved up this weekend.
Yeah.
He got a massive win over Jimmy Manuwa, which was one of the most fun fights I can remember the past stretch that we've been on. Is that your fight of the year? We're doing fight of the year awards now. Is that your fight of the year? Is that top 3 in fight of the year?
You know, I that's a really good question. And I was, right before we went on the air, I was thinking about my top 5 for fights of the year. And I didn't have that on the list, but I think that was an oversight. I think that needs to be somewhere. That was an absolute barn burner. I mean, every blow thrown in that fight was a potential fight-ending blow. It was completely insane. It was like watching Mortal Kombat. It wasn't even like a real fight. It looked more like an action movie where the guys were like, Santos was just button mashing. It was like a video game. It was completely bananas. I think it has to be on my top 5. Of course, we know, Gaethje Poirier's got to be there.
Ferguson Pettis,
Korean Zombie Rodriguez,
Ferguson
Pettis. Those are obviously in the top 5 somewhere.
Whitaker Romero as well. I think those are my top 5 in some order.
Whitaker Romero, but I think Santos against Manuwa has to be there. Also, Santos had a great fight against Anthony Smith. That was one of the best fights of the year too. Way back early on in the year. I think that was in February. At 185. So that guy is just a human highlight. I mean, that guy, it's never boring when Thiago Santos is in there. So yeah, that's got to be on my list somewhere for certain.
Yeah, when I was in Toronto for this past weekend, and we were watching that fight from the media room, and the media room was just going ballistic watching this fight. Like, I remember somebody, I wish I could remember who, but at some point somebody said this looks like the UFC video game when your energy bar is just on empty, and so you're just throwing out these moves with like very slow speed that have no power behind them, but they're just crazy moves. Like Santos did that, like a capoeira type of kick that was not even close at one point when he was rocked. Like, it was just the most fun thing. But hey, let's move on. What's next?
All right, we got more from the MMAfighting.com comments section from Tyler9141. Tony Ferguson versus Max Holloway for the interim belt. I'm not going to get into whether the interim titles are ridiculous or not, but that's the fight that should be considered in case Khabib's suspension is going to be as long as 6 months or longer. Max versus Tony is the best fight ever. Till Max TKOs Tony, because let's be honest, he will. Okay, Tyler. If either Max or Brian had average chins, one of them would be at least knocked down on Saturday. Sean, buy or sell Tony Ferguson versus Max Holloway next for the interim lightweight title.
I could not sell this more. I could not sell this quick enough. If I had shares in this, I would offload them right now. That is absurd idea, and I love that fight. I'm not going to say I don't love that fight, but I do not understand, and we're going back to this weekend, I do not understand this rush to move Max Holloway up to 155 at this point. I understand coming into this, there were a lot of concerns about how he would react health-wise and just kind of what his situation was. It was worrisome that he didn't know what messed him up back in July. But, man, I was there in Toronto. Like, he seemed fine all week. He was very lucid all week. He was articulate all week as much as Max Holloway is. And he didn't seem like he had really any problems with the cut whatsoever. He's on his track right now to potentially being the greatest featherweight ever. People are already calling him that. I'm not ready to put him there yet. But like he's one of these supremely dominant champions. Why do we need to feel this urge to just move him up a division just like this? Like, they're 155 already has enough problems going on. It's already backed up enough without throwing another guy in there who would supposedly get an immediate title shot in this case. Because what are you going to do with Max if you're not going to give him an immediate title shot? He deserves it. So there's already enough contenders there. Tony Ferguson, Khabib needs to happen. Dustin Poirier is still around. Like, you can't throw Max into that mix just willy-nilly. I want to see Max stay at 145 and really just collect as many scalps as he can. See how far he can take this. See if he can be the next Jose Aldo and surpass Jose Aldo just in that regard, man. There's still fun fights. Frankie Edgar, Moicano, Mendez. Like, there's Volkanovski coming up. Like, Bektik's coming up. Yair Rodriguez, who has the KO of the year. Like, there are fights for Max Holloway at 145. I do not understand this rush to move him up.
Who would you put next for Holloway if he were to stay at 45? Would you go Edgar? Would you give Edgar that shot? Would you go Moicano? Who would be next, you think?
I would give it to Edgar at the moment if they had to book something immediately. But if they have a little bit of time, I would like to see the Mendez Volkanovski, see how that fight plays out. Because I think either of those guys would be interesting challengers. Also, Moicano, I would like to see his next move because he was kind of there. And then he got screwed a little bit. Like, he screwed himself. He didn't make championship weight as the backup fighter, which is the first time I've ever seen that happen. But
Moicano screwed Moicano.
Yeah, but I mean, there are options there, man. Put a tournament together, something like there are fighters and challengers there for Max Holloway. I want to see how far the Blessed Express can go on this current track, man. This dude is 27 years old. He just turned 27. Do you agree with me? Like, do you feel like I do understand, I guess, the rush to move him up?
Well, I think that certainly 155 doesn't need him because 155 is absolutely loaded with talent at the top. I mean, it is stacked. That top 5, even the top 10, there's so much talent there. The only way that I would say, okay, time for Holloway to move up is if that weight cut really is debilitating to him. And we know it's very big, but like you said, he did have a very good weight cut in Toronto last week. Will that happen again for the next fight? I don't know. He had trouble making weight to get to 155 on short notice against Habib Nurmagomedov. So,
well, that was a different circumstance. So
it's short notice.
He's coming off of an injury, and then it's short notice.
Yes, 100%. But I do think his future is at 55. I don't know if it needs to be his next fight necessarily, but you also have to look at where we're at lightweight. I think that Dana White seemed very, and it's not often that Dana White is so adamant about a fighter moving up in weight, especially a champion moving up in weight. It's very strange, actually, that he would do that after UFC 231 like he did, saying, I want to see Holloway at lightweight. It was what he was pushing for, which is surprising. It's not uncommon. And part of me wonders, is that because there is so much uncertainty with Habib Nurmagomedov and Conor McGregor? Both of their hearings were supposed to be on Monday in front of the Nevada Commission. They both got postponed until likely January 29th. Now, what does that mean? It means that the division at the top, we have no idea what's going on. We have no idea when Khabib is going to fight again. I don't know if Khabib is going to fight again in the first half of 2019. I don't think McGregor's going to fight again in the first half of 2019. I could be wrong. But if they're looking at 6, 9, 1 year suspensions, it could put them out, and we just don't know. So let's say they even get shorter suspensions than that. We won't know until January 29th. That's a long time from now. That March fight, I think it's March 2nd, UFC 235 in Las Vegas, is a marquee spot for a big fight. And I don't know if we're gonna know in time to get one of those guys on that card, and we have no idea if they'll be available or not. So part of me wonders, is Dana White saying, hey, Max Holloway, go up, because he just doesn't know about the state of where that division is going to be at the top. Now, there are certainly people who can fill in. Ferguson is available.
Ferguson Poirier, interim title fight.
Ferguson Poirier, right. Gaethje is still kind of hanging out there, kind of the tier below that. The winner of Kevin Lee Ally Quinta on Saturday on Fox in Milwaukee will also be in that group. But I don't know. Maybe there is a thinking that Holloway is a pay-per-view attraction, and maybe Ferguson Poirier is not a pay-per-view headliner. I don't know. I mean, you still have Nate Diaz somewhere. You know, where does Nate Diaz come in? It seems like a good time for him to kind of show his face again and see what's up. But I think that, and right or wrong, I think that might be White's thinking, that we have no idea what's up with McGregor and Nurmagomedov. The first half of 2019, Holloway can be a guy who can headline pay-per-views, and you can do a pseudo super fight against Ferguson or someone like that, or whoever. I don't know. I don't necessarily know if that's the right move to make. But look, a lot of the UFC's booking lately, matchmaking, has been kind of hot-shotting, has been kind of just going with whatever fills the short-term goal and that short-term hole. And there are holes to fill, my man. UFC 233 has no main event, and it's what, 6 weeks away, 7 weeks away. Well, maybe 8 weeks. But I mean, it's getting close. We're getting real close to that on January 26th in Anaheim. There's no main event for that card. Who's available? I have no idea.
I understand exactly everything you're saying, and you're right. The UFC's matchmaking has been very willy-nilly over the past year or so. But at a certain point, you got to call it where it is. Like, there's got to be a line, right? Because I'm all about the pursuit of greatness. I think that's the most interesting thing in this sport, is seeing people really just try to do amazing, great things. And Max Holloway is on a road right now to do an amazing thing. He's already breaking records at 27 years old. The fact that he has the record for the most significant strikes landed in his career already at 27 years old, beating guys like Michael Bisping and Frankie Edgar, is frankly astounding. Like, I didn't believe that stat when I heard it. I had to double check with a couple people. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. I want to see this guy, just see how great he can be. If he is one of the greatest, if he is already one of the 2 greatest featherweights ever, and if he can make himself the unquestionable king of that, and also just emerge as sort of one of the greatest champions ever, I want to see that. I don't want to be shortchanged by this notion that we have to, like, do every fight as a champion versus champion fight. Let some people just sit here and be great in their own division. There's time, man. There is time for Max to test the waters at 155. Let's let him do it once that division settles itself out for a little bit. Because, like I said, Ferguson, if Khabib and Conor are out forever for a long time in 2019, Ferguson Poirier is as good as a fight as you could possibly make for an interim title fight. That is a tremendous, amazing fight. And it's not like we're needing other contenders at 155. The list is deep there. So I just don't get it.
Realistically, though, how many more fights do you think Holloway really has at 145 before that weight cut does kick in hard again? I mean, it's.
Well, I would say, if you would have asked me that last week, I would have said one. I would have said just this one. But I would just speaking to him all throughout the week and being there, like, it seemed really manageable for him. He seemed like to be doing really well the entire week. And if anybody who watched that fight, Max Holloway was in no danger of slowing down at any point during that fight. That was one of the most incredible snowball rolling down a hill fights I've ever seen, where he started fast and he got faster and faster and faster as it went on. Like, he just overwhelmed him in the most Diaz-esque way. It was so impressive. So I just don't understand. It feels as though Max can make this wait for a couple more fights.
We'll see. We'll move on from here back to Robin G again. Robin G making waves on a
Killing it.
Wednesday.
Killing it.
What do you have to do to get a point deduction? If you are a Brazilian cowboy, I think we probably know who Robin G is referring to here, and you will most likely be choked out or split up badly if your Icelandic competitor takes you down. Why in the world are you allowed to clearly use blatant fence grabbing to keep the fight standing? What is with all these warnings? These dudes clearly know the rules, and you told them the rules before the fight. Step the F asterisk up and give him a point deduction. So Robin G is referring to the Alex Oliveira Gunnar Nelson fight on Saturday night at UFC 231, where Nelson was on the verge of getting a takedown against the cage. Oliveira grabbed the cage to stay upright, and no point was taken away.
Two things I like about this question. One, he completely goes pure vague, no names. It's kind of mysterious. I like it. Also, Robin, we can swear on this show. You can say fuck if you want to say fuck.
Sean swears all the time. You got the potty mouth, man. God.
That's rich coming from you. Where if off the camera you're swearing like
I never swear on the air. I'm a professional.
So hey, I mean, to answer the question, it's simple. It pays to cheat in MMA, right? Like you kind of just get a set number of fouls that you can use, and you can allocate throughout your fight, and it'll be fine. You could poke a guy in the eye once, hit him with the balls once. You could hold the cage once. Probably not going to get a point taken away from any, and all of them are going to benefit you. Like that's nothing new. Like this has just been Chad Dundas has our colleague over at Bleacher Report. Chad Dundas has a repeating joke about this, just calling it Dundasso, because that's you can do that. I mean, you get 3 or 4 fouls before something gets taken away, unless it's a very, very specific situation or like a high pressure title fight, or maybe you get like a Herb Dean or a Mark Goddard in there who are willing to assert themselves. But for the most part, a lot of referees who aren't the Mark Goddards are not going to take those points away, man. And it's a fight. You got to do whatever you can to win. It's very silly and very, very stupid. But I mean, that's just kind of the way the game has been built for a lot of these officials.
Yeah, I mean, referees will say that they have to weigh a number of things when they are going to take a point, including how much impact whatever that foul has on the fight. And if they feel like it has a great enough impact, then they can take a point. Usually they do give the one warning first, and then there's another warning, which is like a hard warning, which basically means like if you do it again, that's it. It's kind of like a 3 strikes you're out type of thing. Every referee has a little bit of a different style to it, but that's kind of how they've explained it to me when I've asked them about it. Although in this particular case, I think that at the very least, the referee should have given Nelson the position, right? Maybe don't take a point from Alex Cowboy, but if he used the fence blatantly, which he pretty much did, to stop the takedown, give Nelson the takedown. Set them, break them up, explain to Cowboy what he did wrong, and then put them on the grounds where Nelson intended the fight to be before Cowboy cheated. And that's what he did. He cheated. That's what I would say for that. Maybe not take a point in that situation, but give him the position. He earned the position. The other guy just cheated to get out of it. So it's look, this is never going to be an easy topic, and I know that referees have a very, very difficult job, and MMA is a weird sport, and there's so many different things going on in the cage. For the most part, I do agree that referees should have a little bit of a quicker hook when it comes to pulling out a point and taking a point away. But I do understand that in a 3-round fight, taking 1 point could swing the balance of the fight quite a bit. So they have to weigh, did that foul swing the balance that would equal taking a point swinging the balance? It's a very tough situation, and referees do not have an easy time. It's tough in there. It's rough.
I will say, if we ever do an MMA fighting-esque charity fight event where all of us fight on some level of some card,
who are you gonna fight?
Oh man, I am punching somebody in the balls, kicking somebody in the balls, or
who are you fighting? Who's in your way? Gi?
Who would be in my weight class? I don't know. I guess
he's in your weight class, right?
He's a lot taller than me. He might weigh a little more than me, but I'm punching balls, kicking balls, or poking eyes in the first 30 seconds. That's just.
How about is Brian Tucker in your weight class?
I don't think so. I think we could do an open weight A-side match, me and you.
I'm not fighting you, Sean. How tall are you?
6'1", maybe.
I'm not fighting you. That's ridiculous. Come on. How much do you weigh?
Like 195, 200.
Come on. We're multiple weight classes apart.
I'll cut down, man. We'll be fine.
No, No, that's ridiculous. Come on.
Look, I'm just saying expect.
Why are you trying to beat on a 5'6" guy?
I'm just saying expect to kick in the balls. That's all.
That's the least of my worries in a fight with a guy who's 6'1", 195. Get out of here.
Let's move on.
Yes.
Next up, coming from Lodovic on MMA Fighting, who asked Dana White versus Tyron Woodley, which is seemingly the rivalry that just will never end. It is quite ridiculous. So he writes, okay, I think it's safe to say now that Dana White is not Tyron's biggest fan. Us fans never see the full picture. We have no idea what's going on behind closed doors, but the distaste Dana has for Tyron is blatantly obvious now. What could be the reason for that? Why Tyron? Also, how much does this kind of fighter treatment play a role when fighters are choosing the organization to fight for? Do fighters consider the Dana White versus Scott Coker question, or is it mainly money? Could Dana become a liability for the UFC if he doesn't get his personal feelings under control? P.S. Sean, those pre-fight, post-fight shows with Alex were absolutely amazing. Thank you. I appreciate that a lot. That's something I'm still working on and trying to get better at. So I appreciate that, Lodovic. So Mark, Tyron Woodley and Dana White are feuding again. And this is Groundhog's Day.
I'm shocked by this.
This is Groundhog's Day. We've seen this every single Tyron Woodley fight for the most part. Thoughts?
So, yeah. So this is not a surprise. Of course, this has been ongoing for many years, and it's intensified since Woodley has been the champion since he beat Robbie Lawler in 2016. 2016, right? Yeah. So I think this stems from a number of things. One of them being that Woodley is not what the UFC would probably want in a company man. And what I mean by that is he is not a guy who is going to not speak freely. He's going to speak freely about what's going on. He's going to be very open and honest. His truth about how he feels about the UFC, about Dana White, that's obvious. He's done that from the jump. He's always been very honest. That's one thing. Other thing is I think that he pushes back when the UFC asks him to do something. It's not the UFC would like every fighter to be like, hey, we have this fight for you. It's on this date against this person, and this belt or not for this belt. And the fighter goes, thank you, Mr. White, or thank you, Mr. Shelby, and they take the fight, and that's it. Tyron Woodley is not that guy. He's going to push back. He's going to ask for different things. Ultimately, he has always taken the fights, though, that the UFC has offered him for the most part.
To the detriment of his career, more or less, because there are some often uninteresting fights when it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. He's taken some tough fights that maybe other guys would not have taken as champion against the Damian Maias of the world and so on and so forth. But he does push back. He does not make it easy for the UFC, which is fine. That's completely fine, but it's not what the UFC wants. And Woodley is in a position right now where he just fought in September, right? He just fought in September. They want him to fight in January, which is I mean, it's a little bit above average turnaround time as far as speed goes, and he's still dealing with some injuries. And this is what we talked about before too, Sean. There are all these holes to fill on the schedule, on the calendar, and this ESPN deal kind of makes things even more complicated because now January 19th, that would have been an FS1 card. That would have been an FS1 main event, which does not need to be a title fight, doesn't need to be really even a huge contender fight. It can be what would be like a middle of the card fight on a pay-per-view, right? That's what the January 19th card would have been if it were last year or this year, 2018. But now it's on ESPN. So there's pressure on the UFC to make that card bigger. So they needed to take Cejudo versus Dillashaw for the 125-pound title, pull that from UFC 233 and put it on the ESPN card because they want to please their new broadcast partner as much as they can. They put some other fights on that card to make it more high profile, like Greg Hardy. Say what you will, but they think that's a high profile fight, high profile guy. They're putting that on the ESPN card, which leaves now the pay per view UFC 233 without a main event, without a number of big fights. They even pulled the Calderwood Lipsky fight off 233 and put it in Brooklyn. So they're trying to stack Brooklyn to the detriment of UFC 233, and that is the situation. And that's why there's more pressure on champions to fight as often as they possibly can, because the UFC is committed to making pay-per-views headlined by champions. And if you only have X amount of champions, You need to keep rolling these guys and girls out as much as you can. And Woodley is one of the guys who is somewhat available right now. He's not tied up with the fight that just happened, although he'd only fought in September, and he doesn't have a fight scheduled for later on. He's a guy that's somewhat available. He has challengers that are available, so they're putting pressure on him to take this fight at UFC 233, and that is the latest in this saga between him and Dana White. It's fun. It's great. It's great stuff.
It really does feel like Groundhog's Day, man. Like we go through this every time. And I want to push back on one thing you said. It was sort of at the beginning of when you were talking about this. You say he's not really a company guy, and I don't know that that's true. I feel like he is one of the more interesting company guys that is a champion, because he is someone who has taken, as you mentioned, every fight that the UFC's offered. He kind of got this reputation early for pushing for big fights and fights maybe people didn't think he deserved, and asking for the Nick Diaz's and GSPs of the world. But more or less, all he has done throughout his title reign is fight pretty consistently when he's not injured, and fight the challengers that would be the obvious number one contender, even, like I said, to the detriment of his career, going against Thompson twice, going against the Damian Maia fight, and these type of style matchups where maybe it's not going to be the most interesting fight. Even the Darren Till fight, it was pretty obvious who the UFC kind of wanted to win. All of the marketing muscle was going behind Darren Till. Tyron Woodley felt like an afterthought. I think he was the underdog by the time that fight actually came. I picked him, but I feel like he was the underdog by the time it actually came, just because there was such a promotional push around Darren Till. And aside from that, like, Tyron is a great promoter. Like he basically does most of his own promotion. He has his show on TMZ, which I never watched, but I'm sure other people, there's a market there for whoever pays attention to TMZ. He's in movies. He's releasing rap singles. Like, he's out here trying to make opportunities for himself, really without the UFC's help. Like, he's more or less just hustling by himself. And he's also just a fascinating dude who's, like you said, he's an honest guy. Like, he's a great interview. Anytime you talk to Tyron, you're going to be excited to talk to Tyron, because he's going to say some interesting stuff about whether it's his opponent, the division, or just what's going on in general. It's bizarre, and I feel like, because I talked to Dana White on Friday about this. There was a little bit of a scrum after weigh-ins, and I asked him, what's going on? Can you give us some clarity to this situation, because nobody seems to know who's going to headline UFC 233 right now, as you mentioned. And he basically said, Tyron should fight with an injured thumb, and it's just like, man, he's the champion. Maybe if you want to fight with an injured thumb, you can, but there's no obligation to fight injured. You're the champion, and you're going to be fighting no matter who you're fighting. It's going to be a tough challenger. And he, like you just mentioned, he just fought 3 months ago. He would have been more active in 2018 if the UFC hadn't booked Colby versus Damian Maia, Colby versus RDA, like a month before Tyron was able to come back. They could have just done the Tyron Colby fight if they didn't need to fill these spots on the schedule, and could have waited a month. So the whole thing is kind of, it's sabotage, more or less. Like, the UFC constantly actively sabotages Tyron in a way that is very obvious to see. And one thing that stood out to me the most when I was talking to Dana was he was heaping all this praise upon Ben Askren, who it's like, what world are we living in now, where he's just talking about how Ben Askren's his new favorite, and he loves Ben Askren's attitude, how he just wants to fight everybody. It's just like, this is the guy for years that you just crapped on constantly, and now Ben Askren's your favorite. Like, we're just living in bizarro world now. It's so strange.
And just to be clear, when I was talking about Woodley earlier, this is a guy that should be a great ambassador for the sport and for the UFC. He did a lot of work in his community. He's an all-around good guy. Very few people outside of Dana White have bad things to say about Tyron Woodley, and maybe Colby Covington, who's trying to get that fight. But yeah, it's a weird dynamic, and there's obviously some look, those guys have not gotten along for quite some time, White and Woodley, and White has kind of bagged on Woodley for his fighting style in some of those fights, but Woodley is the UFC welterweight champion, and he is bent on keeping that belt and winning fights, and he will win fights in any possible way that he can. He's an incredible strategist, and sometimes it doesn't lead to the most exciting fight in the world, like against Damian Maia and against Stephen Thompson twice. Although the first one was not too bad.
Yeah, the first one was really good.
Yeah, But that's who he is. Tyron Woodley is a technician. He really is.
I mean, he beat Darren Till without getting hit once.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think when we look back at Tyron Woodley's title run, we'll appreciate it a lot more than we do now. We'll kind of forget about kind of the back and forth with Woodley and Dana White, and we'll look at all the guys that he beat, the way that he beat them, the efficiency in which he beat them, and say, wow, Tyron Woodley almost quietly became one of the best welterweights in the history of the sport, and I think that's how he'll be looked at. He isn't looked at like that right now because of what the UFC has put out there about him.
Yeah, I will say, before we move on, I'm really interested to see what happens with UFC 233, because if you know, that's the same day that they're going against Bellator Bader versus Fedor, which is a big card, which is a really big card. They're going in the same market as them, and if you just go down the line, man, there's just not a lot there for them. Flyweight's taken up. They moved that away. Bantamweight, same. Featherweight just happened. Lightweight is tied up with Khabib and Conor, mostly Khabib. Welterweight is Tyron. Middleweight's already booked. Light heavyweight is December. Heavyweight, DC just fought, and he's waiting for Brock. And then all the women's division, same thing. Rose is hurt. Flyweight just happened. And bantamweight and featherweight are tied up. There is no titles available for this January card that is less than 8 weeks away, 7 weeks away. That's a big card going against Bellator in the same market. I have no idea what they're going to do. I asked Dana White about that, and he said, I always have the ace up my sleeve, but I don't think Daniel Cormier is swooping in to fight Derek Lewis in the UFC 230 type of situation for this one. So I have no freaking clue what they're going to do.
Do you think there's any way they get DC versus Brock done for 233? Is there any way they try to pull that out of their hat?
I don't see how it could possibly happen. That is so soon.
It's very soon. And I know Cormier is dealing with some injuries.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It seems like that fight is probably going to happen if it's going to happen
in March.
UFC 235 in March, but I'm just at a loss. There's just no, unless they go against everything they've said and do the 165-pound belt and and try to figure it out from there. I don't know. Where's GSP at? Where is George St. Pierre at?
That would be such an excellent way to salvage this situation, is doing 165. I know people don't want to hear it because we always talk about it, but that would be such a cool, impromptu, exciting way to salvage this division. Or not this division.
Who would it be? Who would you put as the two challengers for that belt?
I would take somebody from 55 and somebody from 70. So I would go Ferguson. And who's like the top 70 that would be like the most likely to drop down?
I don't want to see anyone from 70 drop down.
Stephen Thompson isn't the biggest guy.
I don't want to see anyone from 170 drop down.
That's fair.
How about George St. Pierre versus Tony Ferguson?
God,
165-pound title.
I'm a Tony Ferguson mark, so I am so all in on all of that. That sounds amazing.
I could have said a broomstick in Tony Ferguson, and you would have started walking to Anaheim right now.
You're not wrong. But hey, let's move on.
And by the way, Tony Ferguson is an Orange County guy. He lives right there. That's a perfect fit. That card.
Let's book it. Me and you, matchmakers. Let's do it.
Also, I wonder if they would try to get Cyborg to turn around quickly if somehow the Nunes fight ends up without any injuries. It's a very quick turnaround, but
like a 3-week turnaround.
She's the draw in Orange County.
The Nunes fight is the last on her UFC deal. They would have to pay her so much money to turn around.
Is it actually though?
I mean, I don't know how Champions Clauses work in her case.
Actually,
that's what she keeps saying. So we'll see. You're talking to her later today, so you find out first.
That's what I was gonna say. Well, how about this? We will have an answer for you guys in a few hours because I am jetting from the A side directly to Huntington Beach, California, where Chris Cyborg trains, to have a little media day with her. So stay tuned for that on MMAfighting.com.
Mark, I just got stabbed in the heart. I don't understand how to react right now. Someone just tweeted us during the middle of this show that the Suns are considering moving to Seattle or Vegas. Oh, Jesus Christ. Let's just move on. I can't handle myself.
Maybe you'll move to Vegas.
I can't talk about this. Let's move on.
Hey, you're in Vegas. Vegas is like your second home, so
I'm not even going to entertain this.
All right.
What's next?
From used to be good. I like that screen name quite a bit. Is Dominick Cruz badly injured? I don't know about Dominick, but I do think Dominick Cruz is injured. Can you provide an update on his health, and is the Lineker fight still on the table? I mean, yes, like it was reported yesterday by a few outlets that Dominick Cruz is injured and the Lineker fight is up in the air. I believe MMA Junkie reported that the fight is not off, but it's up in the air. I mean, I hope for Dominick Cruz to say that it's not so bad that he has to be out of that fight, because A, that's another fight that would be gone from UFC 233, and B, can this man catch a damn break? Can this man catch a damn break? It is frustrating because he is a phenomenal fighter, phenomenal fighter. Like possibly could have been in the all-time great conversation, but just the bad luck and the injuries, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have, none of this is confirmed, so this is just me talking. Don't write articles about me saying this, but I've heard that it's
definitely write articles about this.
Yeah, so I've heard that it's a shoulder injury that he suffered at the end of last week. I don't know that that's true, but if that's the case, that's like literally right after the fight was booked, man. How bad of a break is that for Dominick Cruz if that's true? I know the fight is still on at the moment and they're trying to keep it together, but good God, man. This guy's been out forever, and the moment he gets a fight booked, something like this happens. That's unfortunate.
It sucks. And again, like I said, Dominick Cruz is a phenomenal fighter. Last guy to beat Dillashaw, and I think that he has a bright future in the sport. On commentary, I think that he's very good. I think that analyst on the desk, color commentator, I'm sure he'll be part of that move to ESPN. But we know the guy loves to fight. We know that he is phenomenal at fighting, and just the injuries have piled up. Really, I mean, it's really him and Cain Velasquez as the guys that you wonder, had they been healthy this whole time, well, what would things be like? How would the kind of journeys of those two divisions have been different? And I guess we're still wondering about Cruz. Hasn't fought since he lost the belt to Garbrandt. Which, by the way,
speaking of, that
card was Ronda Rousey against Amanda Nunes. That's how long ago it was now.
Oh, wow.
So Dominick Cruz fought as recently as Ronda Rousey did.
When you put it that way, that's a little crazy. And I know if Dominic is out there kind of looking at Cody to see if he would replace it. So I mean, that's still a good fight, but hopefully Dominic's okay, man. But hey, let's keep things going. Next up from the MMA fighting page from Trumbo, who wants to know about a featherweight contender tournament. Moicano, Mendez, Yair, and Zabit. Winner gets a title shot while it plays out. Let Frankie have a shot at Max. Thoughts? I love that. I'm going to just say that I'm all in on that. What about you, Mark?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I would be so down with that if they can figure that out. I think I have to mute this Slack. It's just freezing up on me. I apologize for that incessant noise. But I think I would be now. I understand that Ortega just beat Edgar, and that's Edgar. Edgar did come back and beat Swanson after that, so he has a win. But I would be Frankie Edgar has been, promised this title shot, I feel like 7 times in the last 2 years. It should have been Edgar so many times. It was supposed to be Edgar in April of this past year. In March of this past year. That didn't work out. Holloway got hurt. I have no problem with Edgar being the guy to get that shot against Holloway next. And in the meantime, yeah, it would be cool to see the division play out that way in a kind of a tournament format. We have Mendez versus Volkanovski, which I think that fight's going to get lost in 2 weeks at UFC 232 because there are the 2 title fights. There's a lot of good fights in that card, but that is a really, I was gonna pull an al-shatti and curse on the air. That would be very unprofessional, but that's a really, really good fight. And then yes, you have Zabit kind of lurking in the background there. Yair Rodriguez. Look, if those 2 guys fight, I don't know what will happen. I feel like it might break the time-space continuum because of the crazy highlight reel stuff those guys are capable of. So I'm all for that fight. The winner can fight the Mendez Volkanovski winner, and then you have Moicano kind of hanging out there too. I'm not sure what would be next for him, but Yeah, I mean, I'm all in. I'm all in for that, and something like that could also build, like you said, Sean. If you want Holloway to stay at 145, that could build interest in the division and who's next for him.
Yeah, I love everything about that. Sorry, my dog is like dreaming over there and she's making absurd noises and it was making me laugh while you're talking. I am all in on that. And also, like you said, Frankie honestly did the UFC a favor. Like he didn't need to fight Brian Ortega back in March. That title shot was already his and should have been his even before that. Like he's kind of been he when you do the UFC a solid like that, especially if you're someone like Frankie who's been at this for so long, he's a legend of this game. He won against Cub Swanson a couple months ago. He looked really dominant in that fight for stretches. Like I'm all about just paying it forward and letting that guy get the next shot while the division figures itself out. Because like we were saying at the top of this show, like there are a lot of interesting contenders for Max. So Max Holloway versus Frankie Edgar is as compelling of a fight for me as anything else.
Plus, Edgar still has that name, so it's still that's a valid pay-per-view main event. Edgar's a former UFC lightweight champ. More than the other guys in that division, Edgar still has the name. Also, he's beaten Mendez. So yeah, I'm in for that.
Also, I mean, that's just if we're talking about Max, like what's in it for Max, that's a great scalp for Max to be able to try to get. Frankie Edgar, like I just said, is a future Hall of Famer. Like if you can keep collecting these Jose Aldo, Brian Ortega, Frankie Edgar, like that's just making your resume look incredible.
But could they do it at UFC 233?
Man, I don't know what they're gonna do. They need something. But hey, that let's move on to Twitter. We got an insane amount of Twitter questions today, just probably the most we have ever gotten. So let's move on to Twitter. I will hit you with one right now.
Yeah.
Let's see. Hey, this is right up your alley. You were there yesterday in California. This one's coming from Jake Dundend, who asks, has Jon agreed to VADA testing? If so, is it fair or unfair to ask him to do so considering his previous 2 USADA test failures? Thanks, guys. Love the show. Thank you, Jake. So Jon has not agreed to VADA testing as far as I know. That just came up yesterday. But Mark, is it fair or unfair for the California State Athletic Commission to even ask this of Jon Jones?
Yeah, that's a good question. To be completely clear, to clarify, so Jones was in front of the commission yesterday in an effort to get his license back because it was revoked back in February after the positive drug test from UFC 214 in July 2017, the fight with Cormier that he won, got overturned. We know the whole story by now. So Jones got his license back. That's the most important thing. But very interestingly and surprisingly, during the hearing, one of the commissioners, Martha Shen Urquidez, who you remember from the first Jones hearing back in February, was very combative with Jones. She proposed that Jones enter into the VADA program, the Voluntary Anti-Doping Agency program, in addition to USADA, which is the UFC's partner. And her line of thinking was, at least what she put out there at the hearing, was she would like to see Jones do that for his own good, because if he wants to truly clear his name to get negative tests back from VADA, I guess would be more meaningful than to do it through USADA, which has a financial relationship with the UFC. Now that is certainly her opinion, and Jones and his attorney Howard Jacobs deliberated over this for a few minutes yesterday in Sacramento,
along with UFC executive Mark Ratner, who was also
along with Mark Ratner. Of course, he was there in attendance at the hearing, and they agreed to it in principle, but they need to look into more of what VADA is and what the contract would say and what they would test for, what it would mean. Essentially, you can't really agree to something like that without knowing all the details, which I completely understand. That's completely fine. None of this, again, was contingent on Jones getting his license back. He got his license back. That's done. This would be an extra thing that he would need to volunteer to do. So I don't know if he will do it. It does seem like a lot of drug testing leading into this fight against Gustafsson in just over 2 weeks now. And then I guess they would test him after the fight too. A lot of drug testing leading into that because he's still got to deal with USADA. And then to do VADA on top of it, it would be a lot. But I guess the commissioner from California felt like, I mean, it was almost a blow to USADA in a sense, what she said, right? It was almost like a lack of confidence in USADA.
I would say that whole commission meeting was a blow to USADA.
Yeah. So basically what she was saying is like, people can't really believe you unless you get tested by this agency that's not affiliated with the UFC, which I think that there is some validity to that, but also Jon Jones has tested positive twice under USADA. So it isn't like USADA is like trying to cover up Jones' positive drug test. He popped twice under USADA. So it's a very strange, surprising situation. And ultimately, it's up to Jones. I don't think he's decided yet. We'll see. I'll follow up this week later on, but that's where it's at right now.
So you didn't answer the question, but I'll answer the question. Is it fair? I don't. To me, it would not be fair if they had required it. If it was
right.
If it was a mandatory thing that to get your license back, you have to do this thing that no one else needs to do. That would not be fair. So it is fair in a way in my eyes, the fact that it's not mandatory. It's up. They can choose. But it is one hell of a power play, I will say, by the California State Athletic Commission, because that seemed to catch Jones off guard, including in his attorney as well. And even Mark Ratner, it seemed as though they were not prepared for that proposal. And so it kind of puts him on the spot in an interesting way where, I mean, in the way even Martha phrased it is, this is for your legacy. This is for you. This is for your own good, for people to believe you. It was a hell of a power play by the California State Athletic Commission. I'm going to be really interested to see whether they accept it. I feel like he almost kind of got put on the spot enough to where they might have to accept it, but MMA moves fast. If they don't, I'm sure people will forget at some point. But Mark, I think you may have just seen the same thing I did. There's breaking news here on the A side. This is what happens when you have a live show. ESPN reporting that the UFC is rearranging its pay-per-view schedule, and UFC 233 will no longer be taking place in Anaheim on January 26th. They are just scrapping it.
Mm-hmm. We had just spoken about this, Sean.
Yeah, they're scrapping the whole card. They're not going to go against Bellator in the same night on the same market, which is interesting. And also, they're going to keep a pay-per-view on the schedule at a later date, so they'll have the same amount of pay-per-views. But they just didn't have anything. There's no ace up the sleeve. It looks like 233 is just not happening.
It's wild because as our friend Ariel Helwani from ESPN noted in his tweet, this is the second time in the same amount of years that they've had to cancel an Anaheim pay-per-view in January. It happened last year too.
Oh,
they were going to do a show.
You're right. You're right. I didn't.
Yeah, second year in a row. And it begs the question: what are they just using too many bullets at the end of the year? When I say that, I mean, are they just trying to stack those cards at the end of the year too much that the January card suffers? That is the question. It's happened now 2 years in a row. Why is that? I'm not sure. Honestly, you could have done Cyborg versus Nunes as the headliner for UFC 233. Didn't have to be on the Jones Gustafsson card. Hey, it's great. It's a great value. Look, that's a great card. Most fans are gonna want to buy that for $65.
I disagree with that. I think they could have not done that. I don't think Cyborg would have waited another month. That was the big thing. Is she just needed to fight. She just wanted to fight, and she was already waiting such a long time. I think they would have gone through hell to try to negotiate her to wait another month.
I think that there's definitely some truth to that. But if you told Cyborg, hey, you can headline in essentially your hometown, in Orange County, miles away from your gym and where you live, where she is a draw, where she has a ton of fans, that could be intriguing to her. And you know what? I'll ask her about that as well when I see her later at the media day. But it begs the question: why have these last two January events been canceled? What as far as matchmaking, what is the UFC doing that is preventing them from having a show in January on pay-per-view? Now, a little bit of a different situation because they had to move fights to the ESPN Plus card, whereas there was no ESPN situation last year. It was just a fight night on FS1, and it was just kind of like a straight. They had nothing. This one they had a main event, a very good main event for that market. It was Dillashaw, who lives in Orange County, against Cejudo, who grew up in LA, who have fans in that market in Southern California. So that made sense. That made great sense for a UFC 233 main event, and it got pulled because they needed something for ESPN. There's just the UFC does a lot of fights, and it's very, very difficult for Dana White, Sean Shelby, Mick Maynard. By the way, we've criticized them a little bit for their matchmaking, but when you run 40 plus fight cards a year and you have to fill these main event slots with viable fights that people will pay for, it is hard. Those guys are scrambling daily.
That's the problem, though. You just said the problem. Like, you had asked what the why this keeps happening, and that's it, man. The UFC ultimately is just having to serve too many masters when it comes to this insane amount of events. A few months ago we looked at the year-end schedule and just talked about how great it was, because it really is. This past couple months, included, and then this month as well, December, have been incredible for MMA fans, just in terms of the fights we've seen. But that comes at a cost, and especially now when you have to, like you said, serve the ESPN Masters and really do a lot for those first few ESPN shows. What, you're laughing over there?
Scott Coker just tweeted a very funny GIF. I would encourage people to check out Scott Coker's Twitter.
Ultimately, man, they're just serving too
many
guys.
Scott Coker, how about that?
It's just too much. It's just too much. There aren't enough good headlining worthy fights to be able to cover this many bases. And you hit the nail on the head with the year-end stuff, man. They just stack these year ends, and then they're left with nothing for the beginning. The fact that this is back-to-back years now where you're losing the Anaheim pay-per-view, that's pretty ridiculous. I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. That's quite interesting, to say the least.
All the people who asked us which is the better card, UFC 233 or Bellator at the Forum in Los Angeles, guess what? You no longer have to decide. The decision has been made for you. Bellator will go off January 26th. Bader versus Fedor. Pico on that card. Mousasi versus Lovato Jr. for the Bellator middleweight title. It's a very good Bellator card. It's an excellent Bellator card. And now it will be the only game in town in Southern California on January 26th.
Yeah, it's the right move. It's the right call. It's the right call.
I think so. And then you can put whatever fights that were on there. You can move those to maybe the ESPN show, which is only a week earlier. You can move them for some fights. By the way, there's an ESPN show in your neck of the woods in February that needs fights. That doesn't have a main event yet, and that's not too far away either. So this is gonna be a problem they run into really this whole year. It's already been a problem, and it's probably only going to intensify with all these added ESPN shows. And I think ESPN and Disney expect a premium product.
Yeah. Well, hey, let's keep it going on Twitter. Next up, coming from Quentin Hoytby. I got nothing. Well, however you say that last name, and I'm sorry, I'm butchering it. But he writes about
Quentin Rampage Jackson.
Nice.
Is that right?
He says, I'm a huge Valentina Shevchenko fan, and I was so happy to see her finally win the title after a year of almost fights. So I was wondering what you guys thought about her potential as a star and how to get her there. And so this is an interesting question, Mark, because I talked about this last week quite a bit on the preview and post-fight shows, where it almost felt like Valentina was sort of this uncrowned queen at 125. And now she finally has it. That was sort of her narrative forever of just, when is she going to get this title? Now she has it. I mean, Jessica Ai is probably next. It seems like that is the obvious number one contender fight. Maybe they go a different route. And I know Jessica Ai wants respect from the media, but I don't know that that's like an ultra competitive fight. To be honest, I feel like Valentina Shevchenko wins that fight. And I don't know that there are a lot of really difficult challengers for her, at least in the immediate future. So I guess, what do you think? I mean, what do you think about her potential as a star, and how do you get her there?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, because I think Valentina Shevchenko is one of the best fighters in the world, period, man or woman. She's one of the best technical fighters in the world, period, man or woman. But that does not always translate into stardom, and that is what Quentin is asking, right? How can she become a star? And I don't know. I would love to say keep winning fights, but we know that's not always the case. Demetrius Johnson never became a quote-unquote star. He won a lot of fights. He won a lot of fights in a row. He was the best in the world, pound for pound. So how does Shevchenko get there? I don't know. I think that her fighting style, people have criticized. It's maybe not exciting enough for some. She doesn't always finish fights.
Let me jump in there really quickly, because that's actually something that's been interesting to me. I feel like she almost has a reputation somewhat as being this very exciting fighter, which doesn't quite actually jive with the reality of it. Because like you said, I mean, she's obviously amazing. I'm not criticizing her, but she's not the most exciting style. And it's not the most fan-friendly style. It's a very point-heavy style. I don't understand where this reputation came from as a very, exhilarating, exciting fighter.
Because I think people equate strikers with being exciting, which
That's
is
fair.
of course not really always true. And personally I find watching Shevchenko fights fascinating because she is so, I mean, her fundamentals and her technical acumen are just off the charts. I mean, she does everything. She does all the basics incredibly well. She's a great athlete. She has a great top game.
She's incredibly strong at 125, and also she was faster than Joanna, which is the one area where I thought if Joanna can win, she's gonna have to be much faster than Valentina, and Valentina was faster than her even at the higher weight class.
She is yeah, I mean, she's amazing. She is an amazing fighter. And I think to be a star, the UFC just needs to tell her story as well as they can. And to me, she's one of the more fascinating people in the entire sport. I mean, this is a woman who doesn't really have a gym. She doesn't have a gym. There's no home gym. She doesn't go to Jackson. She doesn't go to AKA. She doesn't go to, Saralongo. She doesn't have a home gym. She lives on the road with her sister Antonina, who, by the way, is also a great flyweight fighter, and their coach Pavel Fedotov. They pretty much they're like nomads. They just travel the world. They've lived a little bit in Russia, and they're from Kyrgyzstan. They've lived in Peru. They spent some time in Texas. They spent some time in Denver, Las Vegas. They did part of their camp in Maine. They live a nomadic, like true martial arts lifestyle. And I think the UFC needs to tell that story and make people know who she is as a person, because she's one of the more fascinating and interesting people that there is. She does not live that life of a fighter like other people do, where you get up in the morning, you go to your home gym. She doesn't have a family. I mean, her sisters are there, but she doesn't have a husband or kids. She lives on the road. And I think if the UFC tells that story, she could break through as a bigger star. And then of course she'll win some fights, and maybe she'll get some finishes along the way, and that'll help. But yeah, right now it's really, I mean, she hasn't hit that, as good as she is. She has not hit that stride yet as someone who could maybe draw money for the UFC in that way.
That's true, and I think a lot of that is because of all the BS she's had to go through to get to this title. Although I do feel like there's actually like a path there where she could potentially become, maybe not like a huge star, but just like someone who people are consistently, the mainstream is maybe paying attention to, because, and I think part of it is because the lack of the depth at 125 right now. We don't know how good Valentina really is at this weight division yet. We don't know her ceiling. Maybe she is the next Demetrius Johnson, or maybe she'll lose in a fight or two. But if she is so much better at this weight class than we think, than everyone else, that as much as we think, because I feel like she's very much looked at as sort of like a leagues above everyone else at 125. Maybe we'll start seeing, maybe she'll start getting the type of showcase fights as a champion that will improve her stock in the public perception, the mainstream perception, where if she is able to blow the doors off of people in this division now as her run as champion, because I really believe Joanna was probably her hardest challenge for a bit, maybe something could be done there.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible, and the challengers are, a lot of them are still unknown to the majority of the UFC fan base. So the Just Guy does have a little bit of a name, and even Liz Carmouche has a name. That would not be the worst idea as the next challenger, because she does have a win over Shevchenko. It was a number of years ago, but she has beaten Shevchenko, so that's a possibility. But we have to wait and see. I think that if they they just tell her story well, they continue to put her on cards, maybe as the co-main event of certain cards, put her on ESPN maybe. I think it could happen as long as they tell her story properly, because she is not your typical fighter. She's very different.
Absolutely. Well, hey, let's keep it rolling. Next up, coming from Twitter, is Andrew Gurgis, who wants to know about Cowboy Cerrone. He says, do you think feeding Cowboy another hungry young lion, or to another hungry young lion, and Alexander Hernandez was a good idea? I don't want to disrespect him, but it's feeling very gatekeepery. And thanks, he likes the A side. Thank you for that. Yeah, man, I have to admit, I was surprised, because we had heard for weeks now that there's something big in the works for Cowboy. I was surprised that he ended up with Alexander Hernandez. What were your initial thoughts on that matchup?
Surprising, because Cowboy had been tied to different fights. Like Anthony Pettis was a name that he was kind of attached to briefly, although the timing did not work out and the matchup did not work out for Pettis' team. there were some rumors about that. There were some rumors about some other more well-known, bigger name lightweights. So when I saw Alex Hernandez, I was surprised. And from what I've heard, and I have not completely confirmed that, what I heard is that Cowboy agreed to the date. He said, "I'll fight anybody," because he's freaking Cowboy. And then they said, "All right, you got Alex Hernandez," and he said, "I don't know who. I have no idea who that is." That's what I heard. I don't know if that's 100% true, but that's what I heard from a couple people.
That's probably true.
It's probably true. He's like, "I have no idea who that is," and he doesn't care. He does not care. He does not give a damn. But Alex Hernandez is really good, and that sounds a little bit like what happened with him against Darren Till, where he was like, "All right, whatever, I'll just fight that Till guy," and he lost. So I mean, it's a very tough fight. It's a little bit of a, it's not a lose-lose situation, but certainly Hernandez has a lot more to gain in that fight than Cowboy does. But I mean, look, this is Cowboy. It's just Cowboy being Cowboy. It's a fight. He wants to fight. There's a date on the calendar, and look, he is the real deal. He really does not care, and he's fighting Alex Hernandez, and you're not going to hear him complain about it. He'll be ready to roll.
It's not even just a Darren Till thing, because he did the same thing with Leon Edwards. He didn't know who Leon Edwards was when he initially agreed to that fight, and he lost that fight. Man, I will say I don't know if I like this fight. I don't think I do. I'm kind of on the fence about it. It's obviously a big step for Alexander Hernandez, a big, giant opportunity to make a very good name for himself after a really surprising 2018. But Alex Hernandez is really good. Alexander Hernandez is really, really good. And that is a tough fight for Donald Cerrone to come back to 155 for. I was looking forward to the idea of Cowboy back at lightweight to be able to try to make one last run at this weight class. He's a dad. He's holding his kid up like Simba. Like, there's a cool story behind him. This feels like you're just throwing him to the wolves to kind of, as this person said, I don't want to say gatekeeper, but just to let Alexander Hernandez use Cowboy's name to advance his own status in this division. I really wanted like a Cowboy Gaethje, Cowboy Conor would have been fun. Like Cowboy Pettis would have been fun. I don't know if I like this fight, but it's a dangerous fight for Cowboy, and what a damn man that guy is, just accepting it. He doesn't give a shit. He's just doing whatever he wants. That credit to you, Cowboy, man. You're crazy.
Yeah, that's just Cowboy, man. That's what he does. It's what the man does. Should we move on?
Yeah, let's do it.
See a few someone's asking, why do I look way better in my Twitter pic than live? Definitely not as handsome as the picture. This is from Stub Don. Well, my apologies that I did not deliver in person for you, but
they're disappointed by the moneymaker, Mark.
That Twitter picture is it's a few years old now. Gotten a little older, probably gained a little bit of weight. I can tell you one thing for certain: haven't grown any, have not gained any more height. So yeah, there's a few things. I may be past my prime. I
think the growth spurt is coming. I have faith.
It's possible. Someone else asking, when am I going to change my name to Marundi for good? I've thought about it. It's possible.
I mean, the rest of that says it's pretty catchy and enticing, which it is. Marundi is a very catchy name.
Catchy and enticing. Yeah, that's good. I mean, look, maybe DC is on to something.
Enticing. That's a great way to describe it. What's next? I got one if you don't have one.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Let's see. Can you explain how Joseph Benavidez, this is coming from Joe from H-Town, Joe Daddy on Twitter. He says, can you explain how Joseph Benavidez has continually been on the back end of the prelims? What's going on here with him?
I'm sorry, I got distracted. Can you repeat that?
How dare you? Can you explain why Joseph Benavidez has continually been on the back end of the prelims? What's really going on with him?
I loved at the tough finale when Benavidez got that big win. I mean, the guy won by knockout in that fight.
Twice, two knockouts. Really?
Who was the ref in that fight again? Who was that?
Oh man, I can't remember on the spot, but he let him get knocked out twice.
Yeah, and so you pretty much knock a guy out. The ref comes in, touches you, And he did briefly stop because that's what you do when the ref comes in and physically touches you. And then the ref backs away. Was it who was it? Was it Eve Levine?
Was it Eve Levine? I think it's Eve Levine.
I think it might have been. So yeah, so Benavidez gets touched. The fight is over in his mind because the referee is physically putting his hands on him. So he stops. Alex Perez then gets a better position, and Benavidez wins the position back, gets top control, and then wins by TKO again. I mean, what a professional to be able to have the composure. I mean, that is a true veteran to have the kind of composure to do that, to essentially win the fight by all accounts in your mind, and then lose position, get it back, and then win the fight all over again. Just amazing. He's really one of the true professionals and one of the true veterans of the sport, especially in the lower weight classes. He's been around a long time. He's pretty much seen and done it all. As far as the question about, I know that's got nothing to do with the question, and I don't care. But as far as the question at hand about Benavidez being on the back end of some of these cards, I think that's just what they've done with the flyweight division. I don't think it's necessarily a knock to Benavidez, who I believe. I mean, I think he's certainly a main card guy. Same thing for his fight against Sergio Pettis too at UFC 225 in Chicago. That's a main card caliber fight. But I think that the UFC lost faith in the 125-pound division long ago, and they did not want to. They just did not want to promote it on bigger main cards. I think they felt like fans didn't really want to see it. I don't know how true that is, or if it's more of a self-fulfilling type of thing where if you don't present it in a certain way, then fans won't dig it. But it's not a Benavidez thing so much. I mean, he's a big name in that division, so it's conspicuous when he's on the back end of the fight cards. But it's more of how the UFC has treated the flyweight division than it is how they treated Joseph Benavidez.
Yeah. While you were talking, I confirmed it was Eve Levine, so we were both right.
Yeah. I'm working to confirm that UFC 233 story. That's why I was momentarily distracted. So I apologize, Sean.
We don't accept your excuses, and I'm just going to keep talking because I don't accept your excuses whatsoever. How dare you? You're talking about you're being a professional, and you're not a professional.
I'm trying to do a million different things at once and talk to you.
The people need you to pay attention. But hey, Joseph Benavidez. I just want to add, he is one of two people that I feel the most bad about what's going on with flyweight, because both he and now I'm blanking out. Jesus Christ. Jussier Formiga. Both he and Jussier Formiga are two guys who have worked so incredibly hard and so long to really position themselves as sort of a title contender, to be able to get that shot at 125. Joseph Benavidez, it was never going to happen for him if Demetrious Johnson was champion. And now Demetrious Johnson isn't champion. He was basically the next up in line. Same with Jussier Formiga. And now this is going away. We don't know for a fact yet, but it's probably going away. I feel so bad for those guys, man, because if you remember when flyweight first began, it was basically created for Joseph Benavidez. Like, he was the guy that was going to be the Demetrious Johnson, and then it just never happened. And then he's gone through all these injuries, these knee injuries, and just everything. And for him to come out the other side of it and really be this close to where the point where he's still the backup fighter for Henry Cejudo versus DJ, or Henry Cejudo versus Dillashaw, and to just have it not happen, that is unfortunate.
And he's beaten Cejudo. He's beaten the champion.
Yeah.
You would think that, knowing the division, as soon as Demetrious Johnson no longer had the title, it would open up the door for Benavidez to get that shot, because he's been waiting in the wings. He has the 2 losses to DJ, but Benavidez could and has beaten everyone else at 125 that has been up against him. Really, I mean, he lost to Sergio Pettis, of course, in June, but I'm talking about historically. The guy has beaten everybody there has been at 125 outside of the longtime champion, and he deserves it. I mean, I don't like using the word deserves, but if you're going to use it for a guy like that, I think it fits.
Yeah. Well, hey, let's go. I know you got to get out of here pretty soon because you have to run for Cyborg. So let's do one more. Then we'll do the promo, and then we'll get out of here. So last one's coming from Joseph on Twitter at MindJitsu, who wants to know, what do you guys think about Gunnar Nelson's performance on Saturday? Who should he fight next? How far along do you think he can go at 170? Or is he sort of stuck until the 165-pound division comes along? Thanks. So Gunnar Nelson got one of the most violent finishes I have seen in the last couple months against Alex Cowboy Oliveira on Saturday. We talked about Cowboy and Gunnar briefly, but not actually the fight, or the result, I should say. just ripping open Cowboy's head with an elbow, and then just like the waterfall of blood that was gushing out was crime scene-esque. It was like you see out of Red Dead Redemption or something. It was crazy. But it was interesting talking to Gunnar that week in Toronto last week, because he was one of the few guys, along with Cowboy actually, who brought up 165 of his own volition. Like, I didn't ask him about it, and he just started talking about how he needs to fight in this division. And he had a line that was probably the most memorable line of the week, where he said, it's gotten to the point where I'm fighting guys it's two guys who basically are cutting down to 170 to be there for 1 hour, and then they end up fighting at 190, only a little more tired the next day. And he's 100% right. It's just a very silly situation. He has never been one to have to cut a lot of weight. It feels as though his ceiling at welterweight is pretty capped until this 65-pound division comes.
I mean, I would love to see him at 165. Certainly, he's been one of those guys who was vocal about weight cutting before it was cool to be vocal about weight cutting. He's been talking about it for a number of years, and how bad it is. I think that Nelson is still, by all accounts, a very good welterweight, top 10 caliber welterweight. I think at 165 he could be absolutely devastating. I really do. I don't know if that division is going to happen anytime soon, and there are very intriguing matchups for him at 170 in the future and next. And I wouldn't mind seeing him against someone like a Leon Edwards next. That could be a possible headline type fight in Europe next year. That's always a possibility. Even him against like a Rafael dos Anjos, that would be kind of an interesting fight against a guy who's not as big as those guys he has been fighting. That's kind of a cool matchup. Would not mind seeing that. He's not far out from being in the mix in that division, but it is a very stacked division at the top. But yeah, I'm all for a Gunnar Nelson 165 pound. You were looking for a guy from 170 to drop down to 165 to fight for a title. He may not be a guy that would drop down and fight for the title right away, but. And I know I said that I don't want to see anyone drop down, but he is one of those guys that I could see. I could understand that I would not be upset, because he does not really cut a lot of weight to get to 170. And 165 is probably a little bit of a more natural weight class for him, I guess, if you want to call it that, whatever that means. But yeah, I mean, he's a guy that there are a number of guys who that 165 division is kind of made for. And I think that he's one of those guys.
Yeah, him and like RDA are the two that immediately stick out in my head as guys who could really use 65 at the
who would come down. And you know what? Donald Cerrone is one of those guys as well.
Jorge Masvidal. There's a couple.
Masvidal is one of those guys. I mean, and guys at 55. I mean, even let's be honest, Khabib Nurmagomedov is one of those guys who's probably a better fighter at 165 than he is at 155. Probably Tony Ferguson too. I mean, Kevin Lee. There's a lot of them at 55 who could probably be 165ers.
Well, hey, really quickly, I know we said this was the last one, but let's do one more just very, very, very quickly, because Stashed on Twitter basically doubled down and asked us, please answer this before you end the show. So really quick, Mark, Zabit Magomedsharipov matchmaking. Who would you like to see fight next, and how many fights till he gets Max Holloway? I would like to see him get Renato Moicano. I know it's a big jump, but Moicano just didn't make the championship weight. I don't think he's in the best of favor with the UFC right now. That feels like that would be a big step up, but a very worthy step up after Zabit hasn't really gotten the chance to fight somebody of that caliber. And if he wins that fight, I give him a title shot. That's my opinion.
Wow, title eliminator next for Zabit, you think?
I think I wouldn't be against it.
I want to see the Yair Rodriguez fight. I just really, really want to see that fight. I think that is, again, we talked about it already. That is a highlight reel waiting to happen. That's a fight of the year 2019 waiting to happen. And I think he wins that fight, gets one more, and then he fights Holloway. That's my take on it.
That's fair. I think he's one or two fights away regardless.
I agree. But that division does have some names. It really is going to be about how fighters win, not necessarily if they win. Mendez would need to have a big performance against Volkanovski to kind of continue his standing out at 45.
Agreed. Well, hey, let's do the promo, and then we can get out of here. Do you want to go first or me?
Yeah, I'll go first. I was just going to give just a quick update on what's going on with the top of the lightweight division, and it's unfortunate what is going on here, and it's not necessarily anyone's fault. Of course, no one really wanted to see that UFC 229 post-fight brawl, but that has kind of ground the top of the lightweight division to a halt in some ways. And what Dana White has been saying for, I mean, really months now is we have to see what happens with the commission, how they're going to discipline McGregor and Khabib on December 10th, December 10th, December 10th. That was what he always would say. We need to wait for December. Well, guess what? December 10th came and went. We have no clarification. We have no clarity as to where the top of the UFC lightweight division goes right now. We're not going to get it over the holidays. Both McGregor and Khabib asked for continuances. They were not able to come to any kind of a adjudication, any kind of settlement agreement with the commission ahead of time before that meeting, which is which both sides were trying to get some kind of a settlement deal for. I mean, both sides in both cases, I should say, were trying to get a settlement deal done. Did not work out. The next meeting is not. There's not another meeting in Nevada again until January 29th. So we're talking about waiting more than another month. That's after what would have been UFC 233. So we're talking about more confusion, more non-clarity, and some of the fighters at lightweight have kind of stepped up and said, "Hey, let's just fight. You know, let's try to work this out." Dustin Poirier has called out Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson didn't seem very into the Dustin Poirier fight, and it's just unfortunate that we're waiting for Khabib and Conor to get themselves figured out as far as what the commission is going to do, because the division is just it's the best division in the UFC, and literally we have no idea what's happening with the championship until late January, maybe at the earliest, and then we don't know what's going to happen from there as far as how long Khabib is going to be out, and that's really the key. I mean, we're not really sure about McGregor. Who knows about him and when he'll fight again? But the important thing is the title. Can Khabib come back and come back before Ramadan? Because Ramadan is, I believe, in May. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not entirely certain, but I think May or summer in general.
So Khabib, we know, does not fight during Ramadan and usually doesn't fight in the months right after Ramadan. So we would need to get him back in the octagon by, April would be where I'm sure the UFC wants him in March on that card in Las Vegas. But there are so many questions in that division, and the whole thing is very unfortunate, and no one really knows. So what do you do? What does the UFC do? How do you move on? Do you have Ferguson just fight Poirier? Do you do an interim title because you just don't know? Of course, now there's no UFC 233 anymore. There's no card Anaheim, so that will. They don't need anything for that card anymore. But you still have Ferguson out there. You still have Poirier out there. You have Justin Gaethje, who's unbooked. You have the winner of Kevin Lee versus Al Iaquinta, and then you have Nate Diaz. Where does Nate Diaz fit in? Is this the time that Nate Diaz comes back and calls someone out and tries to work it out? I know that Dana White has been down on Diaz for a bit now, but there are so many possible names, and I guess you can throw Max Holloway in there too. So there is an opportunity now for people to differentiate themselves at 155. It's just unfortunate that we won't get clarity in the division. We won't know when Khabib Nurmagomedov can fight again until late January, which seems like such a long time from now. So the whole thing is just unfortunate.
It is unfortunate. And you had mentioned that it's the best division in the UFC. I agree with you. It is the best division in the UFC. And this is just kind of more of the same, because it feels like for the last, I don't know, two and a half years, basically ever since Conor won the title, we have had this where the best division in the UFC, the deepest, most talent-rich division in the UFC, is a mess. And there is no obvious, it's all just a murky mess. And it's just unfortunate because there's too many names, too many great names in that division for this to consistently keep happening. I don't know. Hopefully this is the end of it. And once Khabib and Conor, and mostly Khabib, get their situation figured out with Nevada, this division can start rolling again, because it needs it, man. It's so backed up at this point.
And just one last thing on that. People have asked me, well, why are they asking for continuances? Why don't they just want to get this over with? Well, to me, it's pretty obvious. They were not in favor of what the commission was offering as far as the suspension length. That seems obvious to me. They were just not down with however long the commission wanted to put them on ice. So they're trying to still work things out. That seems pretty clear to me. Again, I don't know that for sure. That's all speculation. I don't have any inside information. But when you want more time, it's because you can't come to an agreement. And usually that's because you don't agree with what the other side is saying.
Yeah. So hey, on my side, do a little fun one since you're a bit of a downer. I mean, this Friday. This Friday is the long-awaited rematch, man, between Michael Chandler and Brett Primus. This one kind of snuck up on me. I'm not gonna lie. We've been waiting to see this one for so long. I think it's like 18 months at this point.
Is it that long?
It's more than a year. I think it's about 18 months. It's a year and a half-ish. I almost feel like I almost got to a point where I felt like it wasn't gonna happen. But hey, here it is. And I know 2018 isn't over yet, so this is premature, but I'm gonna go ahead and call it anyway, because I am gonna award Michael Chandler with an early best of 2018 award, because I feel like he deserves it. The best promo of 2018 goes to Mr. Michael Chandler. If you have not watched this at all, you should Google Michael Chandler and The Purge together. This man went out and basically filmed himself recreating a scene from the horror movie The Purge, if you've ever seen that, for this premise rematch. And folks, it's like absolutely incredible. I'm not going to lie. I was blown away by this promo. My two big takeaways from this, and look it up. Way to go above and beyond Michael Chandler. He obviously like had some help with some of this. I mean, we speak into cameras for a living. And there was a lot of work that went behind that, into writing the lines and also memorizing the lines and making that just as polished as it was, because that's just not easy. But also, second, Michael Chandler, surprisingly good actor, like especially for a fighter. Like, he is pretty convincingly terrifying, man. He gets the most out of those lines. If this man didn't have some acting gigs already kind of lined up for him, I wouldn't be surprised if he does after this, because A+ all around. Love the creativity, love the execution. It did exactly what I need from a promo, and that is to get me hyped for the fight. So, hey, Friday, Chandler versus Primus 2 in Hawaii. We'll have Esther and Casey there. I cannot wait. Well done, Michael Chandler. You win the Jon al-shatti early best promo of 2018 award.
If I didn't know that Michael Chandler was one of the nicest guys in this sport, I would have been wholly terrified by that promo.
Right?
If I didn't know him, and I didn't know that he was a ridiculously good dude, I would have been very frightened.
If I was fighting Michael Chandler and he put that out, I would be very frightened. But hey, that is what it is. This has been the A-Side Live Chat Podcast. Another episode is in the books. Mark's going to get out of here and go talk to Chris Cyborg. Hey, thank you so much for spending your Wednesday morning, Thursday morning, Friday, whatever day it is you're listening to this, hanging out with us. We really appreciate it. Some great questions today. We'll be back same time next week at the usual time, Wednesday morning, live on MMA Fighting. In the meantime, my name is Jon al-shatti for Mr. Mark Ramondi over there in LA. Thank you once again for joining us. This has been the A-Side. It's been a lot of fun, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Lots of fights.